afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for coming along to the presentation, which I hope you will find informative and useful. I'm covering council tax reduction scheme and the impact it has on you as town and parish councillors, and also on the impact it has on your tax setting discussion and decision. I'm William Jacobs, I'm the Head of Finance at Vale Whitehorse and also South Oxfordshire. You probably know our shared management teams. Paul Howling's over here, he's the client manager for the Works and Fences contract, and Bill Watson, who works for Paul, is also at the back of the room. So if there are any technical questions, I may push those in that direction. So we'll see how we go on. My first slide, I've actually copied up here, because I want to go back to this probably, or I'll probably keep on referring to it as I do the talk. And it's a very simple calculation, but when we start talking about the factors that particularly impact on the tax base, you'll see that it isn't quite as simple as it seems up here, but I thought having that to refocus on every time we get lost in detail might help you. And this simply tells you that you set your precept, you divide it by your tax base, and it will then generate your parish or your town council tax. And that's a decision that you're asked to make on an annual basis. The tax base is the variable, and therefore what tends to happen, or what will happen from year to year, is a number of authorities will set the precept as they did the previous year, and they'll question why their council tax has moved, and it's because their tax base has moved. And today I'll talk about some of the issues which impact on the movement of that tax base. So, along with the tax base, I'll talk about the effect of the council tax reduction scheme on the tax base. Town and parish council tax calculations, so I'll go in a bit more detail about this, and I'll talk about the grant payment that we are making to you in this financial year, and this council needs to make a decision as to the grant payment it makes in the next financial year, and I'll be able to tell you the latest thinking from the politicians. So the tax base is an estimate of the taxable resource in an area expressed as a band D equivalent. You will know that properties of different sizes fall into different tax bands, and in order to express those in a simple way, they're all factored into band D, and the later slide will explain that calculation to you. So, you would imagine that if you had a new property in your town or parish, and that was a band D property, immediately your tax base would increase by 1. It doesn't, it's not that simple. And the reason why it's not that simple is there are a number of considerations that need to be made in order to arrive at the true tax. And these relate to exemptions and discounts that the individual in the property may be entitled to. Probably the one that is best known is single person discount. You're probably aware that if there's a single person living in a property, they only pay 75% of the council tax. They get a 25% discount. So immediately, if that property was a band D property but there's only one person in it, you'll see it's only worth 0.75 of a band D, because they only pay 0.75 of their council tax. This slide and the following slide goes through a whole range of different adjustments that have to be made on a property by property basis in order to arrive at the true banding for that property. Within the papers that we sent around to you, there's a separate single paper that you probably picked up, and that actually goes through all of the different adjustments that we need to consider in order for every property to determine what its band D equivalent value is. Now that in itself will demonstrate to you that this figure varies almost on a daily basis. Yesterday, in your parish or in your town, there may have been a property that was occupied by 2 people, and today one of those people has moved out, and so only one person now lives there. That has changed between today and yesterday, purely as a consequence of that. I won't go through all those details because I think it's probably a separate section in itself to explain all of the variations. So I mentioned the bandy equivalents. You'll see from the chart here, you'll see that if you go down the table, band D, the ratio is 9 to 9. So that means a band D property, at the start of the calculation, is worth one property. Whereas a band H property, with a ratio of 18 to 9, is worth 2 band Ds. So you get twice as much council tax for a band H property. So that means that if you lived, if in your town or parish you only had one property, and it was a band H property, your tax base, all other things being equal, would be 2, despite the fact you've only got one property. So we have to apply that calculation to absolutely every town, every property within your town and parish, and then make the adjustments as I said before. So you can see there are a lot of factors that come into this figure that means it moves. So the question really is how does the new council tax reduction scheme affect you? Because the council tax reduction scheme replaced council tax benefit. It came in on the 1st of April 2013, and the scheme is determined by this authority. This authority decided to retain the same scheme as was the council tax benefit scheme. So they haven't changed the scheme. So people who come through the door and request, say, oh, I need help in paying my council tax bill, will be entitled to the same form of discount. The difference between the two schemes is that one was a benefit. So the old scheme, they may have received a bill for £1,000. We then helped them by paying maybe £200 of that bill. So we gave them £200 to help pay the bill. The difference is under the council tax reduction scheme, they actually only owe £800 in the first instance. So immediately, it's a nuance, but it impacts on the tax base. It's what they owe. It's not. Going forward under the new scheme, they receive a discount to their bill based on entitlement. They don't receive an amount of money to pay a higher bill, and the difference being is that the latter impacts on the tax base. This was introduced by the government, as I said, on the 1st of April 2013. And when they introduced it, they also changed the way in which the scheme was funded. And what they said was, we will, whereas previously we funded the old council tax benefit scheme based on a one-to-one basis, so whatever you had to pay out in benefit on the national scheme, we paid you back in subsidy that was fully funded. They said from the 1st of April, we're only going to give you 90% of the amounts of money that you're likely to pay out. And they calculated themselves how much they thought each authority would likely pay out in benefit the following year. And they assumed for the current year, 13-14, that the number of people claiming benefit would reduce. So the actual amount that we've received, whereas the government says we are actually going to fund it up to 90% of your current level, we actually received an amount less than 90%, which is on the latest scheme. I think it's 83%. Just looking at the back for a nod on that one. Yeah, I've got a nod to say. Yeah, we received 83% of the total cost of the scheme. That meant that there was a decision to be made by the council. The council could have done one of two things. They could have actually changed their own council tax scheme so that people, that the amounts of money we allowed people to benefit under the scheme reduced, so entitlement reduced. By reducing that, it reduced the cost, and it meant that they could therefore match the cost with the reduced funding that was being received by the government. The council decided that they wanted to maintain the scheme as per the previous year, so it meant that that shortfall had to be met by the council, or at least the council's element of it. So when the council set its own council tax for the current year, within the overall calculation, it it looked at those two figures, it identified the shortfall, and it factored in the shortfall to be paid from its own monies, as it were. Now there is a question about going forward in terms of the scheme, because the scheme was only set for 1 year, and as I said before, it's now a local decision to set the scheme, and so we are actually consulting on what the scheme might be next year. So potentially, the entitlement under the scheme may reduce. If that is so, it will have the impact of increasing the tax base. The reason being is if there's less entitlement, so the bandy equivalent figure isn't reduced by as much. The higher that is, because they're all added up to arrive at the tax base, so the tax base will come up. The consultation, I think, ends at the end of this week, and there'll be a decision made by, or a recommendation by Cabinet on the 6th of December with regards to what scheme we will adopt going forward. But as I said, there is a possibility that scheme may change. So this figure calculation, that's the easy way to look at it. A worked example here shows that if you look from the second bullet point, if your precept is £10,000 and your tax base is 250 bandy properties, so the tax would be £40 per bandy property. The precept is always fixed, so once you precept us, you will always get that money, whatever the collection rate, whatever happens to the tax base in the year. Once you say you want that amount, we'll pay that amount, and we pay up, I believe, in 2 instalments at the beginning of the year and partway through the year. And then the bandy £40 will be applied to the various percentages, and so, for example, a band H property within this council, their town or parish council tax will be £80, so it's doubled because of the ratios. So, looking at the funding of that, so we said there's an impact here. We've said that the council tax base will reduce, and we've said that the government currently only fund at 83%. So that's for the current financial year. That's for 13-14. And the grant that we received from the government included 2 elements. It included an element that was specifically related to ourselves, but there's an element that was payable to us, but was identified as the amount that was as a result of the fall in the town and parish tax base. And that element for 13-14 was £200,000. Now, for 14-15, the government haven't said how much we're going to receive for next year. We know that overall our funding is likely to drop by around 15% from the government, but that's yet to be finalised, and we won't know that until probably December, when the autumn statement is given by George Osborne. But we know it's going to reduce. Then in terms of that money, it's actually the decision of the council, this council, as to how much it might choose to pass on to town and parish councils. For 13-14, the council passed on the whole amount, £200,000. Some councils forwarded less than the amount that was identified specifically for town and parish councils. 1 or 2 paid nothing over to town and parish councils. That was for the politicians to explain their reasoning on that. But as I said, there's less certainty, and there's certainly little visibility as to what that grant is going to be going forward, because it's no longer going to be identified as a specific sum in the funding that we get from the government. So when this council sets its medium-term financial plan, and that was set by council in February this year, it identified that for this specific grant, it wanted to reduce the amount that it paid over to town and parish councils down to 0 over 5 years. So the medium-term financial plan, which actually tracks how much, what the council believe it's going to spend and what income it's going to receive over a 5-year period includes a reduction of this amount. Now then, I've spoken to the leader of the council, who's also the portfolio holder, and as of last week, it was still his intention to reduce this sum by 20% per annum over the next 5 years. And clearly that is a decision of the council and is ultimately a political decision. And if that is something that you wish to lobby on, then can I suggest you speak directly to Matthew Barber, who's the leader of the council, because he and his cabinet will be making a recommendation on that to the full council. Matthew's rationale for that is that whereas we don't know what the figure will be next year, or the year after, or in future years, by having a fixed amount which is reduced over time, and this gives certainty in terms of the amount that's available for funding town and parish councils. But as I say, the actual reduction is a political decision, and so as an officer I can't really get involved in a debate on that, I'm afraid.
Can I ask a question? I'm a little bit puzzled by all this, because if you're getting a central government grant of 200,000 as it was last year, you say you don't know what the figure is this year, but it seems to me that whether I can't really see any reasons why that grant should decline. And if it doesn't decline, all you're effectively doing is transferring £40,000 from a government grant payable to the Vale to help parish councils keep their council tax base or their council precept at a reasonable level. And all you're doing is transferring it from a parish fund into a Vale fund. So it seems to me like it's sort of rather than keeping a paid board.
It's, as I say, it's a political decision, so you'd need to make that point for the politician, but it's not going to be really to justify that in any way, so I don't want to get involved in the politics of it.
So can I come back on that?
Yeah.
Because what's really happened is the government has decided that council tax relief is actually a local cost and therefore should be transferred to local authorities and governments to cover. They've actually moved the responsibility off the central government to us. But in the process, because it's a big drop, they're allowing a 20% a year compensation drop. We're dropping by 20% a year. They're compensating for this, so that we eventually adjust to actually funding the whole of council tax relief ourselves locally, either through the parishes, district, or even at county level.
Well, yeah, the amounts of money, I mean, the two sides of this. There's how much is the government giving us, and of that, how much is being distributed to town and parishes. On the how much is the government giving us, we know the amount for 13-14, £200,000. We don't know, and that's because within the settlement, it was specified, an amount.
But as I understand it earlier, originally the government was going to reduce this all to zero, ultimately.
Well, there's been no official statement to say that funding for councils is going to be reduced to zero, but there are people who have suggested that that might happen longer term. But in terms of this specific funding, all we know is what the government have told us in respect of next year in terms of the provisional settlement. And we know that the total amount that we're receiving was probably going to drop by around 15%. We know that, but we don't know this element within that, how much that will drop by, because it's no longer to be identified. So if you go 20 years on, and assuming funding does drop quite dramatically, it could be the amount of funding that we get is less than this £200,000, for example. So in that instance, it can't be that the £200,000 is still being paid to us. But as I said, it's a political decision as to how, when over here it comes to paying money out to parishes, each council can make their own decision as to whether or not they want to look at the amount of money that was paid last year, the amount of money that they think they might be included in the 14-15 formula, or whatever. But it's a political decision.
My point is all you're doing is the Vale is protecting their their precept by keeping it low, by taking this money back, and all you're doing is pushing parish precepts up.
Well, I mean,
to go compensate.
I can totally understand why parishes might have that view, but as it's a political decision, then by all means make that point to the leader.
Can you pedal back a little bit? If we set a precept at £10,000,
yeah,
that doesn't change the money we receive.
No, you'll always receive that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's what people pay, actually.
Yeah.
That you change.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a silly question on this? I mean, all the mechanisms of
perfectly comprehensive. If you just pass your pain on to us, is there going to be any cap at any stage on parish councils to stop them just raising the precept and putting the pain straight back on you?
Well, the government have said that they're considering it, but you're probably as wise as I am on that, because we're still waiting for
So at the moment, I mean, this 2014-15, would be safe just to pass it straight back to you?
in terms of setting up higher council.
The 20% reduction you'll be giving them.
Yeah,
If we've
I
got
mean,
fixed costs to
assuming
run-
there's no government announcement between now and when we have to set our council tax to say that they're going to cap you, then yes, that's so. But I don't know what the government may
And
do.
you as a Vale aren't making any savings because you're having to pay our precepts at the same. I mean, the money you're deducting from us, we just give you back again.
No, because your precept we take from the council tax payers. The council tax payers will be paying more.
Yeah, right.
So when they look at their bill, they will see the parish an increase.
That's agreeing onto the timetable at some point.
Yeah.
Can I make a point? I mean, you mentioned several things about uncertainty with regard to both the level of the grant from government and also the possibility of capping of parish council precepts. You put the two together, and any parish council would be daft to reduce their precept in order to accommodate the grant, because they might go to the accommodating particularly if there's a cap and the grant disappears. So it's a completely nonsensical system. It will not reduce parish council taxes if parish councils are keeping an eye on the future, as they ought to be. A much better way of doing it, if you actually want to achieve the result you want, would be to subtract the grant from the precept, from the calculation behind you, after the precept has been set by the council, and calculate the tax from that.
It's not
the
going to
council gets its
yeah.
precept, which is budgeted for, and the council taxpayers get the reduction that they're perhaps...
Yeah, it's not within our gift to do that. The legislation states that you have to bill us for a precept and we have to collect that money and pay it to you. Now then what we will tell you is we'll tell you before you set your precept what grant you will receive. So you can then make a decision yourself as to whether or not you want to deduct that from the precept before you divide it by your tax base and set your council tax, or whether or not you don't want to and you want to treat it as extra income for that year. And that's a political decision for parish and town councils. And last year's, some people deducted it from their precept, or the amount of money they needed, they deducted the grant and then divided it and had a lower council tax. Some town and parish councils didn't do that, and that was a local decision. Why some did and why some didn't, I don't know. You'd have to ask them as to why they made that decision.
When do you send us these grants?
Yeah, as I said, the recommendation is going to Cabinet here on the 6th of December. I think they are recommendations to Council, and the Council is on the 11th of December.
How do you communicate that?
By letter. We write letters out to you every year. We write letters and we explain this calculation in the letter, and we tell you how much you're going to receive, and we'll also tell you the amount of grant you'll receive. We tell you your tax base, the amount of one-off grant you'll receive, and also explain how you do the calculation. What we don't do is we don't offer advice to you as to whether or not you take that grant into account in order to set your precept amount. That's a local decision.
Last year you got notification, I think it was Christmas Eve, that's when we received it. So Ben over there was doing letters and emails late on Christmas Eve. This year we'll get a letter as William says, that explains what your base is and also what your grant is. So you have it all there in front of you in one letter.
Because there was a major change to local government funding last year, where new rules came in terms of business rates and also this came in, the autumn statement didn't happen until the week before Christmas. And local authorities don't know their funding, what they're going to get from the government, or in this case, how some of these mechanisms were going to work until after that autumn statement. So that's why it was late last year. This year, I think I've seen the date for the autumn statement must be even the 6th of December.
Well, that's very late.
So, yeah. Well, speak to Mr. Osborne about it. I'd like the information earlier.
Because we set our precept before that.
Yeah, and I'd like the information earlier, and if you go back 4 or 5 years, we used to get it mid-November, then it got pushed out to late November, now it's December. But it's still called the autumn statement. I can't influence it.
It applies to all authorities, so parish meetings as well. We do communicate that information to parish meetings.
Sorry?
We do communicate that information to parish
We
meetings.
send that information to the parish, to all parish clerks. And we send the letters out immediately after that.
Meetings as well.
Well, they certainly get the letters because
I just
then
don't
everyone
remember.
responds to us.
I just don't remember having received that information.
You will have done because you will have responded to us, and if you hadn't responded to us, we would have chased you up. So it would have gone. I'm pretty sure it goes to the clerk. It goes out to the clerk. Yeah, I'm getting nods.
One of the problems we do have every now and again is if the clerk, you can change your tax, you've got to notify it, you know, somewhere. You know, if you speak with us afterwards, we can check what details we've got for you.
What we need is guidance on when we set a precept, on what guidance on what impact that will have on individual tax payments.
Should we go on and when you say a little bit more about it, maybe that will help you understand that. But in a way, once you set your precept, you know exactly what your band is. You can calculate that yourself because we will give you that figure. You set that figure, simple calculation. You'll know what your band in council tax is.
It's a simple calculation.
Yeah. Now then, the only thing that will differ will be individual circumstances, and we can't tell you the individual circumstances of everyone within a town or a parish.
That's the problem.
Yeah, we can't, you know. Right, so moving on then, what did we do this year? So, the council tax, the council distributed the grant, and we based it on the needs after looking at 2 factors. First of all, the council tax reduction scheme, as we said, it had a negative impact on the tax base, and the tax base came down. But a second thing happened last year, and that is we reduced some of the entitlements around second home discounts and empty property discounts, and that increased the entitlement. So that then pushed the tax base back up again. And what we did, we looked at what the town and parish council tax was the previous year, the overall reduction in that figure, and we times the 2, and that arrived at the effective loss for the parish council. So in the example that I'm showing you now, you'll see that in this case, the original tax base was 4,000 bandy properties. They gained 50,000 bandy equivalents as a consequence of the reforms on empty properties and second homes, but they lost 200 properties as a consequence of the council tax reduction scheme. So their revised tax base was 3850, so they lost 150 properties effectively from their tax base. As their tax band was, their bandy council tax was £30 in this instance. 30 times the lost properties, 150, meant that they had a loss of £4,500. And what we did last year is we said, well, of the grant that we've received, when we calculate the losses, the total amount of the grant only amounts to 83.88% of the losses. So we'll give all that money out and we'll do it in proportion to the loss. And so we filled everyone's loss gap, as it were, or 83.88% of that loss gap. And that's the way we did it last year. Then going forward for 14-15, we have 2 options for how we distribute that pot and how we set it out. We could say, well, actually last year we did this calculation, and you as a town or parish council received 2.2% of the overall sum. We will, going forward, you can still have 2.2% of the overall sum. That means that right now you'll have certainty if we decide on that method going forward. You'll always get 2.2%, so provided you know the overall sum, you can go away today, you can do the calculation, you can work out what grant you're going to receive. However, it could be argued that, well actually, between last year and this year, this figure's moved up. It's gone up or it's gone down. Either more people have reclaimed benefit or new properties have been built and therefore the tax base has moved. Wouldn't it be fairer to, you go back a photo, yeah. Wouldn't it be fairer to review these two figures here, put in the actual movement and then redo the calculation again? So that's the second option that we're considering. The benefits of that second option is that it could be argued that it's more accurate, it reflects more what's happening on the ground now. One of the disbenefits is the fact that it will introduce volatility. It will mean that your 2.2% in that example may not be 2.2% next year or the year after. It may go up, it may go down. Potentially you could have a council where their situation doesn't change at all, but the grant that they receive will change under this second option, simply because others change. So you may have a council who, or nearby, who are entitled to, their tax base drops as a consequence of more people being entitled to council tax support in that area. And if that is so, although nothing has changed for you, your slice of the pie is reduced because they get a large slice of the pie. So we are actually interested in which of those two options you prefer. I think, Ben, we've got, we put them on a sheet of A4 paper, and we've given you an email address. And if you have any views on that, by all means email us on that email address and let us know. But again, talking to politicians here, they favour option one if only because of it's predictable, it's fixed, it won't move from year to year. But that isn't fixed in stone, and they're very interested in what your views are. I'm willing to take a straw poll now, and that would be interesting if you feel that you have a strong view based on the two options.
Just say with option one, if we knew what the grant was going to be, if we know what the grant is actually going to be, we can actually notify you what you're going to get effectively for the next 4 years.
Yep.
So you know exactly now, or when we send it out, exactly what you will be getting for the next 4 years. So you are interested to do that from your presets.
That would be great if no one's building new houses. New houses are being built in large numbers in some parishes, not in others.
Right.
So over 4 years from now to it finishes, I'll have to figure out the thought if we don't have even one. Option two, I agree, it's around more calculation around what is later.
Yeah, and interestingly, the new houses doesn't have the effect that you think it will have. The fact that you have new houses, it means your tax base goes up. And if you keep your precept the same, either your council tax goes down, or you can increase your precept and keep your council tax the same. However, in terms of this grant, and the way this grant is calculated, if your tax base is going up, it means your gap is reducing, and so you receive less of the grant if you change it under option two, when you've got new houses. So I mean, could I take a straw poll as to those who? And it's not binding anyway, but it'd be interesting for us to get a view as to whether or not there's more of a desire for the fixed nature of option one, or more of a desire for the up-to-date nature of option two. So who would prefer option one?
Before you do the straw poll, do you mean that if you've got a large number of new houses in your parish,
Yeah.
option one, which weren't there last year,
Yeah.
option one would still be better?
Yes. The reason why it would be better is because under option one, you don't change the council tax base. Yeah. If you have new houses, your council tax base will increase.
Yeah.
And I explained before that the way we distribute the grant is we look at the gap, the gap in funding.
Right.
By having a larger council tax base, the amount of money you're receiving is increasing, so the gap's reducing. If the gap's reducing, you get a smaller element of the overall share.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that you won't be better off, because you'll still get all of the council tax from all those new properties, but in relation to the distribution of this particular grant, you would receive less of it under option two.
If you say that if tax base has reduced significantly over the last
and I see, just over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
But we would need to know that to decide which one.
Well, it depends. If you're taking a view on what's best for my council, yes, you would. If you're taking a view as to knowing that this could change the other way next year, what you just think is fairer or best overall, whether or not you think accuracy and fairness is better over certainty, and that is really what I'm asking, because it could. And I'm more interested in principle what you're interested in, rather than what's best for your council, because I know which way you would vote if you were voting for what was best for your council.
Can I suggest a third option, which is option 2, but on a previous year basis, so that the figures are available in good time. And that way the figures won't drift apart as situations change in households and members of new homes.
I don't know what you mean by previous
When
year
you
basis.
calculate, you don't calculate the current state of option 2, but the value that was applied the previous year.
Is that not option 1?
Now, option 1, for the current year, so you recalculate option 1, i.e. as option 2, but apply it next year, not this year.
Oh, you do it a year after?
A year after.
So you know. I can suggest that. I think the problem that we'll have there is people will make a decision not on the rationale and the principle. They make a decision on what's best for them, and we'll know what the answer is to that. I suppose I'm more interested in what people's gut reaction is in terms of the rationale.
I've never had anyone query their parish council.
Yeah.
I've never had anyone.
I mean, option 2 is just making a lot more work for everybody, isn't it?
It is more work.
It is.
Yep.
What's the point of that then?
You probably, if you look at, although we say it's volatile, the actual movement probably won't be that great in terms of the overall council tax decision making. There may be 1 or 2 parishes where they, once they've done the calculations, they may say, "Ooh, that was a sizable increase or reduction," but it'll be a lot of work, and in a lot of instances, we'll be giving you the figure, and it will be different by less than £1 in terms of
The other thing to think about as well is the overall grants are reducing every year, or that's what the leader of the council said. So, there's a small amount actually to go around anyway, so it's not going to do.
I think where you've got an issue here is where people didn't claim on grants in 2013-14. If you go with option 1, then you could have a potential big problem there. And I don't know how you deal with that.
And the other thing which impacts on it is, as I said, we're actually consulting on the scheme, and if the scheme reduces entitlement, then everyone's council tax base, all other things a position for every council, the work involved would be phenomenal for the sums involved. So I think that if the government do introduce capping, there will be general rules, and that's applied to everyone from where they are in a particular year when the rules are introduced. The only thing they may do is they may have a de minimis level, and they may say that it only impacts on councils or precepts over a certain size. That's one thing they may
They
do.
were talking about 100,000.
Right.
I think we're talking about 150.
The requirement to publish financial figures is 130,000 and above, so that could be the threshold.
I think that's one of the things about if you don't take the grant into account, you know, you're leaving it open to your parishioners to complain that you're levying a council tax which is greater than your requirements. You know, that is the danger.
I think a lot of authorities, a lot of parishes that didn't deduct it off the precept, because you set the precept early, and you weren't able to tell you what you can have lost before you set the precept. Obviously with option one, I'm not going about option one, but at least you would know what your grant would be. So if you want to set, I don't know, precept in August next year,
I was asked about timescales on this, one of the questions earlier. There are a number of decisions that need to be made. One is about the council tax reduction scheme, so that how it impacts people who have reductions in their council tax. And that will be made by Cabinet on the 6th of December. We are currently consulting on changes to the scheme, and that consultation ends at the end of this week. It's on our website. And then the Cabinet will consider that in the scheme and the cost of the schemes when they consider putting their budget together for next year. We then have to do a calculation of all the tax bases. We try to leave it as late as possible because then we have the most up-to-date tax base, and clearly that helps. But again, the decision on setting the tax base is made at the Cabinet on the 6th of December. Again, at that same meeting, we'll be taking the paper to Cabinet with regards to council tax reduction scheme grant, so the amount that you receive. So that's both the size of the pool, whether or not it's going to be reduced by 20%, and the method of distribution, whether or not you're using options 1 and 2. Those decisions probably need to be ratified by council on the 11th, but we'll have letters in the post very, very shortly after that.
Can you confirm the date of the Chancellor's budget review?
I think it's the 6th of December.
It is the 6th of
Yeah.
December, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. But
I know he's blogged to the effect that he's going to stick to that date, but believe it when I see it.
Yeah, because that has other impacts for us in terms of budget setting. So,
what is the final date that you need to know our precepts by?
we take a report to set the overall council tax, which goes to Cabinet early in February. In order to write that report, we'd like to have that information as soon as possible. We've tried to see if it's possible to receive the information by the middle of January. And I know we sent out letters previously saying, if you can do this, then it would be really helpful. We are aware that 1 or 2 town and parish councils tend to have their budget setting meetings towards the end of January. And so, provided we do get informed as soon as that decision has been made, and you tell us what your precept is, we could probably hold off until the end of January. But it does help if we can have it sooner than that. But we also understand your predicament in terms of if we're getting information late and we can't let you know, then how can you turn that around and let us know?
Is this going to be a pattern for the future? I mean, you said it slips anyway at national level, because we have our budget meeting in mid-November.
Right.
That was on your old timetable.
Yeah.
The government's old timetable, but it says now to...
This is the third year now that the information coming through to us has been late. Now it's fair to say that there's a change of government, so there's quite significant legislative change. So particularly this time last year, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so that was one of the reasons why everyone was waiting to see exactly how these things would work. And the autumn statement is earlier this year than it was last year. It may be earlier still in a year's time.
How much are we on?
Well, all I can say is we're not going to be advising you of your tax base or in a position to, and the grant that you'll receive until after the 11th of December. Very soon after the 11th of December, but after the 11th.
The finance committee needs to reduce one big meeting compared to some
Yeah.
meetings, and then it's got to go to the full council.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you've got a gap there a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So we've got a December meeting to get a January decision by the council to get to you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always unfortunate that it's over the Christmas period, because we always lose a week, but it's, you know, it goes with the territory as far as I'm concerned. It's part of the job. Okay, well, I hope you found that helpful. I hope it wasn't too confusing, because I know, particularly with reference to both the council tax reduction scheme and the funding of that, the council tax reduction scheme grant, it can be a bit confusing. We've got the handouts and you can take those back, so hopefully when you read through those, some of what I said will become clearer. And by all means, respond to the consultation. Thank you very much. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Presentation is actually going to be on the